Welcome to Emotional Resilience, Living with the Fruit of the Spirit. I'm your host and author, Ron Ovid. Today, we're on session 20, From Reaction to Resilience. Now, we've been talking about why do we behave the way we do? And we've talked about the brain. We spent quite a few lessons on the brain and how it works. We've talked about early childhood attachment and how it results in a certain relational styles. But the good news there is we talked at the fact as adults we can have new attachment styles. And we talked about trauma and how childhood trauma can affect us. And we started looking at different emotions and started to realize, where are we emotionally? How are we reacting? What are some of our triggers? Today, we want to continue with emotional recognition and talk about how do we recognize now when we're starting to be reactive. Because if we can do that, then later we can regulate it, that pause and plan, and we can start to relearn emotionally who we really are. Because when we really start understanding, that we're significant, that we're lovable, that we belong, that we have a purpose, that God loves us, when we really understand these things, it changes who we really are. And we not only learn that from God, our relationship there, we learn it with our relationship with each other. And so we've been studying those things. Recognizing our reactions to sensations helps us then cultivate resilience. In her book, Shame-Informed Therapy, Patty Ashley shared what to look for when we're exercising emotional recognition. What do we need to be looking for? She says a shame-informed clinician will always be looking through the lens of implicit memories. Now, we talked about memories last time, and that implicit memories are the memories that are out of our awareness. If it has to do with trauma, then we're going to remember the tone of voice, right? The look on the face, the body language, the breath, the actions, some of the words perhaps, and we're going to learn those things. We're going to know those things implicitly. They're out of awareness. That memory didn't go back into an explicit memory. It stays there in an implicit form to keep us from getting in trouble in the future. So if we see that same look, we hear that same sound, we smell that same smell, the alarm will go off, right? And so she says we want to be looking through those lenses. What's going on? We want to help that person figure out what are they reacting to. And they want to look through that lens so we can identify clues that might include core shame. Is there a shame? I was a shame-based person. And it's very easy to go around with this sense of shame all the time. And that causes us to have this hypervigilance, to always be aware. It was to me, like there was always a predator in the room. Someone out to get me. I have to behave. I can't let people down. All these implicit rules that I had that was guiding me. And she said some clues may include those that are paralinguistic, right? Those things that have to do with what we're saying. For example, the elements of speech such as hesitation or talking softly or silences or rapid speech, mumbling, stammering, the way we talk, right? The paralinguistic, the way we talk gives a clue sometimes. Is there something going on? And then what we might say, verbal, right? If we start using, hesitation, and we start using words like, well, that was foolish, or that was silly of me, or I'm so ridiculous. Words that give clues, idiotic, stupid, words that give clues that there might be some kind of self-evaluation going on that isn't healthy. And then they talk about nonverbal, such as covering our face or looking down. Fidgeting, hunching, biting the lip, all these little clues that we can start paying attention to that give us a clue that something is going on. A sensitive therapist, she says, can listen for the implicit story beneath the ordinary autobiographical stories that clients tell. A client's experience of depression, anxiety, exhaustion, or fragmentation can provide glimpses into the right brain story, the emotional story, right, behind the left brain one that you easily tell. The wordlessness, and I like this, the wordlessness of shame, and the autonomic response it arouses, such as sweating and increased heart rate and blushing, makes it a primitive reaction that opposes rational solutions. It makes it difficult to recognize. Now, why am I reading that? You're not going to be a clinician. No, but we've asked, let's be our own emotional detective. Let's start looking for these. We need to start recognizing things when things are going on. We can recognize when we're blushing. We can recognize when we're biting our lip. We can recognize when we're using words like stupid, I can't believe I did that, what an idiot. We can tell when we're looking down with that sense of shame, or when we're silent because we don't know what to say. Those are clues. We need to be our own observer, our own detective. And so she was talking about those different kind of clues, and you can go to the lesson and read it and look at those, circle it, and start looking for those clues. And I encourage you, if you're watching this and you don't have the lessons, you can email me at ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send it to you. Just ask for session 20. So trauma affects then our reactions. Childhood trauma affects our reactions. All of us have had it, right? Dr. Robert Scare has done extensive work in the field of trauma. He came to an epiphany probably 15, 20 years ago that he feels that almost all of this kind of reaction comes out of trauma. And he's talking about post-traumatic stress disorder here. He says, we therefore seem to be dealing with a syndrome affecting all aspects of a person's being, including the body, mind, and spirit. This post-traumatic syndrome is produced by threat, shock, or injury that occurs in a state of helplessness. And that's what happens when we're children and we're being traumatized. We're helpless, right? That's a helpless situation. And it also goes around then with the neurophysiological changes triggered by that experience. Things happen in our brain and in our body when we're traumatized. And they're stored then, he says, in a person's unconscious or that procedural memory in a cumulative manner, along with other such life experiences. And that goes along with that story I tell when a kid walks down the hall at school and they already feel inadequate, they already have a mild case of social anxiety, they don't think they're popular, and they see the popular kids and they're walking down, and all of a sudden they're laughing, and they think what? They're laughing at them. Now, they could be laughing at anything, but at that moment, because they're thinking that, and it happens that quick, they're reinforcing that negative view they have. And that's what he's saying here. It's this cumulative manner. All these things add up. That accumulation, he says, of traumatic life experience then leads to a condition of increasing vulnerability and decreased resilience to further trauma. And so what we're trying to do here is correct the story. We want to correct the story and build up the capacity to be resilient. And so we need to have that ability to react in a proper way and have resilience. He says that, Dr. Scare says this, those who present with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder following a variety of traumatizing experience have a specifically relevant history of being abused physically, sexually, or otherwise as children. The original experience of helplessness, no way to fight or flee, led to a freeze or dissociative response mediated by endorphins and predominantly parasympathetically driven. It's a parasympathetic nervous system. Depending on the details of the abuse, the sensory messages and aborted motor responses to the threat were encoded, right? Were encoded in the child's procedural implicit memory. And that's that predictive coding that we talked about last time. These memories involving the sensor motor and autonomic nervous systems are conditioned responses. And that's what we said. These are conditioned responses. They're associations. They are critical to the unconscious survival-based behavior of the organism. Linked to a threat of life and occurring in a state of high arousal, they become conditioned quickly and resistant to extinction, often lasting a lifetime. I'm reading that to you, and you can read it over because I want you to see that there's a reason for the way we're reacting. And here's the good news. We can overcome. Knowing why it's happening will help us then to be able to figure out how to redo it. We can get rid of the lies that we're believing, those triggers. You know, we're not 5 years old anymore. And that person inside of us, that child inside of us can mature and join us in our maturity, and we can start reacting differently. And we'll be getting into different ways to emotionally relearn as we go through this program. And so let me ask you, how do you react to emotional pain? You know, there's many ways to react to emotional pain that we feel, and I use the word pain purposely here. It's that same part of the brain that registers, you know, a paper cut on our finger registers emotional pain, you know, and so traditionally it's been we either fight or we have flight or we freeze. I've added fix because I've learned as a people pleaser over the years that I don't want to flight, I don't want to fight, I don't want to freeze if I can just fix the situation. And so, you know, anything I have to do to placate or subjugate myself or make things right, that becomes a way of recognizing and working with it as well. And so, you know, it'd be nice if we knew some of the ways we're reacting. How are we becoming reactive? And so I've given you lists under fight, like am I getting angry? Am I rebelling? Am I yelling? Am I, hurting someone physically or verbally? Am I trying to control the situation? Or I'm being critical? Or maybe I'm passive aggressive. And then in flight, am I, using addictions to get out of there? Am I avoidance, avoiding talking about it? Am I pushing the people away? Is my body getting sick where I don't have to deal with things? There's a lot of ways to take flight or freeze. Am I, daydreaming? Am I detaching myself? Am I getting stuck or in a panic? And then fix. Am I acquiescing? Am I people pleasing? Am I placating to the situation or giving in? And so ask yourself, how am I reacting to situations? Let that be a clue. Oh, I just did that, didn't I? And then you can back up and figure out what's going on. What's going on? So what makes us more resilient? What can make us more resilient? How, why, can some people bounce back better than others? Well, Martin Seligman, the man who coined the phrase learned helplessness, later developed a theory called learned optimism. And in there, that was started actually the whole movement of positive psychology. And the University of Pennsylvania, where he was, the whole department there talks about resilience, writes about it. And in his book, Flourish, he talks about well-being, and he uses well-being in a sense of resilience here. And he says there's 5 keys to it, and one is, having positive emotion, enjoying life with pleasure and comfort and warmth and peace. And when we talk about that, we talk about, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, and peace, right? Patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The fruit of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit wants to produce these things in us. And then he says, being engaged in what we're doing, that helps us build resilience. Having that positive attitude, like he said, and emotion helps us. Being completely absorbed in what we're doing, enjoying life with purpose. And haven't we said that before? Haven't we said that some of the important things to us is having a sense of purpose? And then, meaning, belonging and serving something that you believe is bigger than life. Meaning is developed and sustained from connection to other people. And so having a sense of meaning and engagement and positive emotions. And then he talks about accomplishment. You know, that pursuing something that brings satisfaction is an important part of well-being. And so when we pursue those kinds of things that bring satisfaction, it helps. And then he says positive relationships. Positive relationships. We're not meant to be alone. Well-being comes from relationships, and that's a relationship with God as well as each other. We need each other. And so those are things, if we're going to talk about being resilient, if we're going to talk about, overcoming some of the negative and painful emotions we have, then we need to do a check take a look at that checklist. What am I doing with my life? What am I doing? Am I exercising positive emotion? Am I engaged in meaningful things? Am I accomplishing things that are important to me? And do I have positive relationships? If not, we need to start. And then they talked about skills for regulation. They talked about researching what makes some people more resilient than others. And the good news is they believe that we can learn to be resilient. And I agree, we can build that capacity. If we didn't build that capacity in childhood, we can build it now. And that's exciting. And so they said they came up with 7 things, and the first thing was regulating your emotions. And we're going to get into quite a few ways that we can start regulating emotions, learning to return to a more receptive state of mind, and experiencing peace and joy is one of the most important skills we can have. And then he talks too about controlling our impulses. That's key to being resilient. How often we implode because we did not control ourselves when an impulse came. The key to impulse control is knowing our triggers. Do you know what your triggers are? When you get out of sort, do you know what your triggers are? We have these triggers, and yet we never take time to list them. We don't have them. We should have them somewhere where we know what they are so we can be forewarned and not fall down that slippery slope. What are your triggers? What causes you to get out of sorts? And then the second thing is, what do you believe when the trigger happens? What are we believing? What are some of the lies? And we've given you in lessons earlier, different lies that you can look at. And what's the truth, right? And so, we want to figure out what are the consequences that we're so afraid of. Someone isn't going to like me. They don't like me. And, if that's the case, I'm going to die. Well, you're not going to die if someone doesn't like you. And so you take that belief, that consequence, and you say, that's not true. And so you want to then, when you know it's not true, reattribute the trigger to implicit memories where you have this, feeling that's coming and it's a lie, so therefore it's faulty wiring. I don't have to listen to this. It's a false alarm. And then you ride it out. And we've talked about this before, and you can look at it in your notes and start practicing that. And so he says, control your impulses. And then the third was being optimistic. The fourth was knowing why. And that's where we need to really look at our story. And last lesson, when we talked about memories, we handed out that life review, your life review. And in there, you were able to look at different segments of your life and look at different things that might have happened. And from that, you get some clues on, okay, what am I believing? Was there trauma there? How did that affect me? What do I believe about myself as a result of that? And so we can start to ask, well, why did that happen? Well, now as an adult, I can look back and say, well, my dad, he was an alcoholic. He was acting out of control because of something that he had. It wasn't my fault. There's a whole book called It's Not Your Fault by Beverly Engel, excellent book, where she talks about a lot of this childhood trauma and how we take it on as if it was our fault. And when we can start figuring out why and get a coherent story, and we can, it doesn't mean we blame, it doesn't mean we have to be a hater, but it means we don't have to take it all on ourselves. We can start believing the truth about ourselves. And then there's the relational side. We need to start having empathy and attunement with others. We need to step out. We need to start meeting people and having empathy for them and having attunement with each other and get that right brain to right brain connection. And then as we, do that, we start to create self-efficacy. And that's the belief in our ability to affect our circumstances or believing in a God that can. It's the moving toward a solution with the confidence that we can do it. So as we start to do these things, we're optimistic, we're knowing why, we're building empathy and attunement, we'll start to feel like we can get some of these positive things going, right? And then we can reach out to others. As we reach out to others, we heal in a community. We're relational beings and we heal with each other. Right brain to right brain. Mature brain helps our brain mature. And so I've asked you in the lesson to rate yourself on those skills. Where are you? And where are you going to be in months from now? And so we want to be able to bounce back from our emotional reactions. For most of us, emotions, they become overwhelming. How do we bounce back then? We're talking about resilience. How do we bounce back to return to joy and peace? Well, by, like I said, by listening to our body, the sensations, learning, how to ride the wave, pausing and then planning if we have to, and then eventually emotional relearning, learning the truth about who we are. And so we want to get away from reacting to being more receptive. And we do that by stopping to realize what's going on. We want to disrupt ourselves. We want to stop. We want to stop it. We want to recognize it and then be able to stop. Take a pause. Hit the pause button. Pause button. If you were sitting there and an alarm kept going off, a smoke alarm, a smoke detector, and there's no smoke, right? And you check everything, and so you keep going. 20 minutes later, it goes off again. There's still no smoke. It goes off again. Pretty soon, you're going to get tired of that. And what? Fix the alarm, right? You're going to fix it. And that's what we want to do. These are false alarms. And it's time that we recognize that it's a false alarm. And it's time to get tired of it, right? And say there needs to be a change. I don't have to live this way. And so we can just start to disrupt and say, stop. I don't have to obey this. We can breathe. We can bring God into the process. We can take a break, right? We can, do things that will help us change the mood, we'll ride the wave, let the emotion dissipate. Emotions come as a wave. What goes up comes down. And so we need to surf it, right? We need to ride the wave. And so, there's positive things we can do, and I've listed some. But you know what? Unfortunately, there's negative things we can do too. And we can isolate ourselves. We can just go into a panic mode. We can, keep busy and worrying where we don't have to face things. We can get numb, right, through alcohol or through drugs, through all kinds of, just video gaming all the time, escaping, right? We can do different forms of escape to numb ourselves. We can become helpless and depressed. Learned helplessness, right? Depression. Those are things that maybe many of us have been doing, but that's not the way to handle the situation. That's not how we need to react. We need to start breathing, bring God into it, take a break, pause, and then plan. We need to get some counseling if we need it, get some help. We need to switch our state of mind, right? We do that by staying in the moment. We turn off the judgment and predictions, and we bring God into the picture. We bring God into the picture. Resilience is throughout the Bible. The Bible was born in adversity. When you think about it, there was war, exiles, famine, occupation, prejudice, persecution, slavery, drought, poverty. Paul wrote a lot of the New Testament in prison. And yet, listen to what Paul said. We are pressed on every side by troubles, but not crushed. We're perplexed, but not driven to despair. We're hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but are not destroyed. Through suffering, our bodies continue to share in the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may be seen in us. And he ends with this. He's there. This is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. God wants to renew you and I. He wants to have that relationship with us so we can come to him as part of our resilience. We can come to him, cry out to him, and let him continue to renew our mind. What are we believing? What are those negative things we're believing? Let's change them. How are we reacting? Let's ride the wave. Let's call out to God to help us, to allow us to be more resilient. That's part of it. Transformation comes through fellowship with each other, through knowing what we believe and start to change it, from becoming observant of how we're reacting, right? And then pausing, looking at what we're believing, start to change the beliefs, trust in God. All those things will help us go from being reactive to more receptive and then to resilience. That's our goal, and that's what we're going to continue to study in this class. So I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.